Crimea. But we're going to start with the Strategic Defence Review. And the situation is that we're all going to war. At least that is, without doubt, the central message from the Defence Review, which has been released on Monday. Back in February, UK columns surmised that the content of the review would be based on the suggestion that the country faces an existential threat, and that this, for the most part, concerns what is consistently described as Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. There are nearly 80 references to the ongoing conflict in the document, and this is what Keir Starmer had to say about it.
The moment has arrived to transform how we defend ourselves and to renew our nation. An investment in British pride and the British people. A defence dividend that will be felt in the pockets of working people and the prosperity of the country, securing growth for generations to come. Part of a new contract to unite the kingdom, a new spirit of service flowing from every part of society, from the supply lines to the front lines. Everyone benefiting, everyone playing their role, doing their duty to the nation and to each other, to preserve our way of life and the things that we hold dear. Because when it comes to security and renewal, nothing works unless we all work together.
There it is. And as though it were a Hollywood production, we'll just continue to look on screen at the trailer that the government's put out recently. The government, of course, has been releasing several dramatic trailers of the Defence Review, and each containing the same fundamental tenets based on an incorrect premise. The first duty of government, of course, is not, as the state would have it, national security. It should be to protect the powerless from the powerful. This review is very obviously a product of its three key authors, they being George Robertson, formerly Secretary General to NATO and a previous Defence Secretary during the Blair years, Fiona Hill, former member of the US intelligence architecture, possibly not former, and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. She's also a dedicated Russophobe, and she has compared Putin to Hitler in the past. And then Richard Barrons, the former commander, Joint Forces Command, with his own defence industry consultancy and an avowed interest in AI and space. So there are plenty of conflicts of interest here, and this will be something that Mike Robinson will focus more on in Friday's programme. Now, in summary, or at least with regard to the content of the review summarised, which is far too detailed to cover in any great depth in the programme, the main points are put by the government as being the move to warfighting readiness, and this draws directly on the integrated operating concept, which has been mentioned consistently on this programme. Next, of course, with Robertson in mind, is the idea that it is NATO first, with the review stating that the UK remains at the forefront of NATO efforts to safeguard the Euro-Atlantic against growing Russian aggression in all domains, providing the ultimate guarantee of UK and allied security in declaring its nuclear deterrence to the alliance. Now, there's a lot more in the review on the nuclear issue, and it's made very clear that nuclear war is not now considered as being a remote possibility. Indeed, and I quote, "Nuclear deterrence can no longer be considered separately from the wider strategic environment, as described in Chapter 2. Any future crisis or conflict in which the UK is engaged may include nuclear-armed or nuclear-aspiring states willing to use nuclear threats to compel or constrain UK and allied decision-making." And lastly is the idea that defence, or rather war, is the product of what is being called a whole society approach. And there's a sense of immediacy here with the recommendation on education that, to quote the review, "To meet the changing needs of the integrated force, education must be whole force by default, single service by exception." And they say by the end of 2026, Defence must establish a career education pathway for the whole force, regulars, reserves, and civil service, designed to respond to the changing ways of warfare over time and with NATO at its heart. End quote. So with recruitment and retention in mind, both of which are in a parlous state, as has been reported here many times, there are initiatives such as improved investment in housing, though nothing really which suggests that the spectre of conscription will fade away. And even though the message has been one of we're not ready yet for the past 3 years, here's Richard Barrons speaking about the apparent sense of urgency in how the money gets spent.
People have had this ambition, genuinely held it previously, but how do we get from thinking about it, wanting it, planning it, to a more Ukraine-like war footing where these things are sort of racing through the supply chain and the development and getting out to the front line?
So I think there are a number of things really in our favour now, and you're right that some of this thinking has been around for a while now. It's just taken time to gestate. The first reason this is different is we live in a much more threatening world, and so you probably don't have the luxury of trying to stay the same. You've got to change to stay safe and deter effectively. The second thing is we have the experience of Ukraine, and Ukraine is an illustration of war in the digital age. It's not a perfect template for how we would fight, but we've learnt lessons in military technology and also in the industrial arrangements that you need to make that work.
Change to stay safe. What do you make of it, Brian?
I think, Charles, it's a huge propaganda exercise. I'm slightly cynical because I'm the age I am, and I've seen a lot of these defence reviews come and go. They've all been a lot of words, glossy paper, and at the end of the review, it's never been implemented fully. So you end up with some improvements, but overall a decline in the armed forces. And we've just been having a look at some interesting statistics here. Relax, it's from Full Fact, so it must be correct. But essentially, if we look, the track record is a consistent decline in UK's armed forces. We're at the point at the moment where we're talking around about 71, possibly 73,000 people in the army. When I first came into the military scene way back in 72, total personnel 371,000, and I think for you, Charles, it was still up at 298. And now we're in this pitiful situation where we can't put troops on the ground. The reality is the success of the Russians in the war in Ukraine has shaken this government to its boots, and they're now desperate to try and pull UK's destroyed military. They want to rab it out of the hat. So I think this is all words. We will see some new equipment, but my prediction is if we're speaking in 5 years' time, we'll be saying what has not worked.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Brian. And going back to Richard Barrons, I mean, what he mentions only obliquely is the main driver of all of this, which of course is the war industry. Now, the government has put out several announcements about specific funding initiatives across the whole of the UK, which this map shows. Now, there's much more to deal with, and we will doubtless talk about this much more in Extra, but I would like to leave you with this chart from the Financial Times, which shows how the arms industry benefits and has benefited over the past 5 years. Now, if you're listening rather than watching, the upward trend shown is completely out of kilter with the all-share line shown at the bottom, which has barely moved by comparison. And with the focus of the messaging on the commercial collaboration, it would seem reasonable to predict that this trend will continue and that this investment will cause precisely the sorts of threats which are alluded to materialise, and thus the circle turn. So we'll come back to that in Extra. But for now,